Linguistic anthropology is the interdisciplinary study of how language influences social life. It is a branch of anthropology that originated from the endeavor to document endangered languages, and has grown over the past century to encompass most aspects of language structure and use. Linguistic anthropology explores how language shapes communication, forms social identity and group membership, organizes large-scale cultural beliefs and ideologies, and develops a common cultural representation of natural and social worlds. Historical development. As Alessandro Duranti has noted, three paradigms have emerged over the history of the subdiscipline. The first, now known as anthropological linguistics, focuses on the documentation of languages. The second, known as linguistic anthropology, engages in theoretical studies of language use. The third, developed over the past 2 or 3 decades, studies questions related to other subfields of anthropology with the tools of linguistic inquiry. Though they developed sequentially, all three paradigms are still practiced today. Anthropological linguistics. The first paradigm was originally called linguistics, although as it and its surrounding fields of study matured it came to be called anthropological linguistics. The field was devoted to themes unique to the subdiscipline, linguistic documentation of languages then seen as doomed to extinction. These themes included grammatical description, typological classification, and the unresolved issue of linguistic relativity. The so-called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is perhaps the misnomer insofar as the approach to science taken by these two differs from the positivist, hypothesis-driven model of science. In any case, it was Harry Holyer who coined the term. Humboldt's philosophy holds an important place in recent work produced in Germany, France, and elsewhere in Europe. Linguistic anthropology. Delheims was largely responsible for launching the second paradigm, which fixed the name linguistic anthropology in the 1960s, though he also coined the term ethnography of speaking to describe the agenda he envisioned for the field. It would involve taking advantage of new developments in technology, including new forms of mechanical recording. A new unit of analysis was also introduced by Hymes, whereas the first paradigm focused on ostensibly distinct languages. The unit of analysis in the second paradigm was new, the speech event. Much attention was devoted to speech events in which performers were held accountable for the form of the linguistic performance as such. Hymes also pioneered a linguistic anthropological approach to ethnopoetics. Hymes had hoped to link linguistic anthropology more closely with the mother discipline. The name certainly stresses that the primary identity is with anthropology, whereas anthropological linguistics conveys a sense that the primary identity of its practitioners was with linguistics, which is a separate academic discipline on most university campuses today. However, Hymes' ambition in a sense backfired. The second paradigm in fact marked a further distancing of the subdiscipline from the rest of anthropology. Anthropological issues studied via linguistic methods and data. In the third paradigm, which has emerged since the late 1980s, instead of continuing to pursue agendas that come from a discipline alien to anthropology, linguistic anthropologists have systematically addressed themselves to problems posed by the larger discipline of anthropology, but using linguistic data and methods. Popular areas of study in this third paradigm include investigations of social identities, broadly shared ideologies, and the construction and uses of narrative in interaction among individuals and groups. Areas of interest. Contemporary linguistic anthropology continues research in all three of the paradigms described above: social identities, broadly shared ideologies, and the construction and uses of narrative in interaction among individuals and groups. Several areas related to the third paradigm, the study of anthropological issues, are particularly rich areas of study for current linguistic anthropologists. Identity. A great deal of work in linguistic anthropology investigates questions of socio-cultural identity linguistically. Linguistic anthropologist Don Kulik has done this in relation to identity, for example, in a series of settings. First, in a village called Gapun in Papua New Guinea, he explored how the use of two languages with and around children in Gapun village, the traditional language not spoken anywhere but in their own village and thus primordially indexical of Gapuna identity, and Tok Pisin, to speak the Tayap language is associated with one identity, not only local but backward, and also an identity based on the display of Eid. To speak Tok Pisin is to index a modern Christian identity, based not on Heed but on Save, that is, an identity linked with the will and the skill to cooperate. In later work, Kulik demonstrates that certain loud speech performances in Brazil called Mescantalo, Brazilian travesty sex workers shame clients. The travesty community, the argument goes, ends up at least making a powerful attempt to transcend the shame the larger Brazilian public might try to foist off on them, again, through loud public discourse and other modes of performance. Socialization. In a series of studies, linguistic anthropologists Eleanor Ox and Bambi Schiefelin addressed the anthropological topic of socialization, using linguistic and other ethnographic methods. They discovered that the processes of enculturation and socialization do not occur apart from the process of language acquisition, but that children acquire language and culture together in what amounts to an integrated process. Ox and Schiefelin demonstrated that baby talk is not universal, that the direction of adaptation was a variable that correlated, for example, with the direction it was held vis-a-vis a caregiver's body. In many societies, caregivers hold a child facing outwards so as to orient it to a network of kin whom it must learn to recognize early in life. Ox and Schiefelin demonstrated that members of all societies socialize children both to and through the use of language. Ox and Taylor uncovered how, through naturally occurring stories told during dinners in white middle-class households in Southern California, both mothers and fathers participated in replicating male dominance by the distribution of participant roles such as protagonist and problematizer. When mothers collaborated with children to get the stories told, they unwittingly set themselves up to be subject to this process. Schiefelin's more recent research has uncovered the socializing role of pastors and other fairly new Basavi converts in the Southern Highlands, Papua New Guinea community she studies. Pastors have introduced new ways of conveying knowledge, i.e., new linguistic epistemic markers, and new ways of speaking about time, and they have struggled with and largely resisted those parts of the Bible that speak of being able to know the inner states of others. Ideologies. In a third example of the current paradigm, since Roman Jakobson's student Michael Silverstein opened the way, there has been an efflorescence of work done by linguistic anthropologists on the major anthropological theme of ideologies, in this case language. Ideologies, sometimes defined as shared bodies of common sense notions about the nature of language in the world, Silverstein has demonstrated that these ideologies are not mere false consciousness but actually influence the evolution of linguistic structures, including the dropping of the and thou from everyday English usage. Woolard, in her overview of code switching, or the systematic practice of alternating linguistic varieties within a conversation or even a single utterance, finds the underlying question anthropologists ask of the practice, why do they do that, reflects a dominant linguistic ideology. It is the ideology that people should really be monoglot and efficiently targeted toward referential clarity rather than diverting themselves with the messiness of multiple varieties in play at a single time. Much research on linguistic ideologies probes subtler influences on language, such as the pull exerted on Tehuacanahuatanoan language spoken in certain New Mexican pueblos and on the Hopi Reservation in Arizona by Kiva. Speech, discussed in the next section. Social space. In a final example of this third paradigm, a group of linguistic anthropologists have done very creative work on the idea of social space. Duranty published a groundbreaking article on Samoan greetings and the use and transformation of social space. Before that, Indonesianist Joseph Errington, making use of earlier work by Indonesianists not necessarily concerned with language issues per se, brought linguistic anthropological methods to bear on the notion of the exemplary center, the center of political and ritual power from which emanated exemplary behavior. Errington demonstrated how the Javanese prié, whose ancestors served at the Javanese royal courts, became emissaries, so to speak, long after those courts had ceased to exist, representing throughout Java the highest example of refined speech. The work of Joel Kuipers develops this theme vis-a-vis the island of Sumba, Indonesia, and, even though it pertains to Tewa Indians in Arizona rather than Indonesians, Paul Crosscritty's argument that speech forms originating in the Tewa forms the dominant model for all Tewa speech can be seen as a direct parallel. Silverstein tries to find the maximum theoretical significance and applicability in this idea of exemplary centers. He feels, in fact, that the exemplary center idea is one of linguistic anthropology's three most important findings. He generalizes the notion, thus arguing there are wider-scale institutional orders of interactionality, historically contingent yet structured. Within such large-scale, macrosocial orders, in effect ritual centers of semiosis come to exert of structuring, the value-conferring influence on any particular event of discursive interaction with respect to the meanings and significance of the verbal and other semiotic forms used in it. Current approaches to such classic anthropological topics as ritual by linguistic anthropologists emphasize not static linguistic structures but the unfolding in real time of a hypertropic set of parallel orders of iconicity and indexicality that seem to cause the ritual to create its own sacred space through what appears often to be the magic of textual and non-textual metricalizations, synchronize